Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The concrete walls are 7 feet thick. The windows are 4 inches wide. And the silence, they say, is the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat until you want to claw it out of your chest. This is ADX Florence, the Supermax prison in the Colorado mountains, where America locks away the worst of the worst. But here's what they don't tell you: it's not the bars that make inmates beg to leave. It's what happens inside their minds when the world forgets they exist. December 2019. A federal investigator named Michael Torres received a letter that would change everything he thought he knew about the American prison system. The envelope was smuggled out of ADX Florence by a corrections officer who'd worked there for 11 years. Inside, scrawled in desperate handwriting on a torn piece of cardboard, were 3 words: "They're killing us." Torres had seen a lot in his 23 years with the Bureau of Prisons. Gang riots, corrupt guards, inmate murders staged as suicides. But something about this letter felt different. The handwriting wasn't angry. It was terrified. He made a decision that would put his career and his life at risk. He was going inside. ADX Florence sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains that look beautiful until you realize they're a natural barrier, making escape impossible. The locals in Florence, Colorado, don't talk much about the prison. It's like a black hole in their backyard, something everyone knows is there but nobody wants to acknowledge. The facility houses just over 300 inmates, but these aren't ordinary criminals. These are terrorists, cartel leaders, mafia bosses, and serial killers. Men like El Chapo, the Boston Marathon bomber, the Unabomber. If you're sent to ADX Florence, the world has decided you don't deserve to be part of it anymore. Torres arrived on a gray January morning, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket and settles in your bones. He'd arranged the visit under the guise of a routine inspection, but he had a specific target: cell block H, where the letter had originated. As he walked through the security checkpoints, each one more invasive than the last, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was descending into something far darker than concrete and steel. The first thing that hits you inside ADX Florence is the silence. It's not peaceful. It's oppressive, like the building itself is holding its breath. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in their cells, alone, with 1 hour of recreation in a slightly larger concrete box. No human contact. No programs. No hope. The cells are designed so that inmates can't see each other, can't communicate, can't even hear another human voice unless a guard decides to speak. Torres met with Warden Patricia Kellerman, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She gave him the standard tour, showing him the state-of-the-art security systems, the immaculate records, the efficiency of operations. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. "I need to see cell block H," Torres said. Kellerman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Fear? Anger? That's a restricted area," she replied. "High-value targets. Terrorist threats. You'd need special clearance." "I have it." Torres handed her the authorization letter from Washington. She studied it for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Follow me." As they descended deeper into the facility, the temperature seemed to drop. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. They passed cell after cell, each one identical, each one containing a human being slowly being erased from existence. Torres had visited dozens of prisons, but this felt different. This felt like walking through a tomb for the living. They reached cell block H. Kellerman used 3 different keys and a biometric scanner to open the reinforced door. "I'll need to stay with you," she said. "Protocol." Torres didn't argue. As they entered the corridor, he noticed something immediately wrong. The cells here were even more isolated, set back from the main hallway behind an additional barrier. But it wasn't the architecture that made his stomach turn. It was the smell. Beneath the industrial cleaning products, there was something else. Something organic and wrong. "Cell 17, Torres said, checking his notes. "I need to speak with the inmate." Kellerman's jaw tightened. "That's Thomas Berkeley. Former CIA operative. Convicted of selling classified information to foreign powers. He's been here 8 years. Torres approached the cell. Through the narrow slot, he could see a figure sitting perfectly still on the concrete bed. The man's head was shaved, his skin pale as paper, his eyes fixed on the wall. "Mr. Berkeley?" Torres called out. "I'm Michael Torres, federal investigator. I received your letter." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Berkeley's head turned toward the door. When Torres saw his face, his blood ran cold. The man's expression was blank, completely empty, but tears were streaming down his cheeks. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't moving. He was just staring, crying, like his body had forgotten how to do anything else. "Mr. Berkeley, I'm here to help. Can you tell me what's happening in this block?" Berkeley's mouth opened. His voice came out as a whisper, broken and desperate. "The experiments," he said. "They're testing how long it takes to break a human mind." Torres felt Kellerman's hand on his arm. "That's enough," she said firmly. "He's delusional. Isolation psychosis. It happens." But Torres pulled away, leaning closer to the slot. "What experiments? Who's conducting them?" Berkeley's eyes suddenly focused, and for just a moment, Torres saw the intelligence operative he once was. "Check cell 23, he whispered. "Check what they did to Martinez." Before Torres could respond, Kellerman pulled him back forcefully. "This interview is over, Mr. Torres. These men are master manipulators. They'll say anything to get attention, to disrupt operations." Torres wanted to argue, but something in Kellerman's expression stopped him. It wasn't anger. It was warning. She was trying to protect him from something. The question was, what? As they walked back toward the main facility, Torres made a mental note. Cell 23. He would find a way back. But when they passed that cell, he couldn't help himself. He glanced through the observation slot. The cell was empty. Completely empty. No bed. No toilet. No sink. Just bare concrete walls and, in the center of the floor, dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. But when they opened the prison records that night in the warden's office, searching for any mention of an inmate named Martinez in cell 23, what Torres found changed everything. According to official documents, cell 23 had been vacant for 3 years. So whose blood was on that floor? Torres couldn't sleep that night. He'd checked into a motel 15 miles from the prison, a rundown place where the neon sign flickered and the wind howled through gaps in the window frame. He spread the files across the bed, official Bureau of Prisons documents he'd requested before leaving the facility. Every page told the same story. ADX Florence was operating exactly as designed, a model of efficiency and security. But Thomas Berkeley's hollow eyes and that blood-stained cell kept flashing through his mind. At 2 a.m, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Torres hesitated, then answered. "Don't go back there." The voice was male, young, trembling. "If you go back, you won't leave." "Who is this?" "I worked there. Cell Block H night shift. I saw what they do." The man was breathing hard, like he'd been running. "Martinez was real. They said he attacked a guard, that he had to be moved to medical isolation. But I saw them drag him into that cell. I heard him screaming for 3 days straight. Then nothing. Then they cleaned it, and suddenly, he never existed." Torres sat up, fully alert now. "Where are you? I need you to make an official statement." "You don't understand. They have people everywhere. How do you think I got your number? They wanted you to know they're watching." The line crackled with static. "There's a nurse. Rebecca Chen. She works in the medical wing. She keeps records, real ones, hidden. Find her. But be careful who you trust. Even the investigators sent from Washington, some of them are part of it." The call ended abruptly. Torres immediately tried to trace it, but the number was a dead end, routed through multiple servers. He stared at the files again, this time looking for what wasn't there. Incident reports that ended mid-sentence. Medical transfers with no destination. Inmates who simply vanished from the official count. He pulled up the personnel files. Rebecca Chen had worked at ADX Florence for 6 years, exemplary record, no disciplinary actions. Her background was spotless, maybe too spotless. But if she was keeping hidden records, she was risking everything. The question was, why? Torres decided he couldn't wait. He'd go back in the morning, but this time, he'd find Rebecca Chen before anyone knew what he was looking for. The sun rose over the mountains like a knife cutting through darkness. Torres drove back to ADX Florence with his service weapon loaded and his recorder running continuously in his jacket pocket. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence. As he approached the facility, he noticed something he'd missed before. Security cameras covered every inch of the exterior, but there was one blind spot near the medical wing entrance, a shadow created by an overhanging roof. Intentional? Or oversight? Inside, he signed in with a different guard than yesterday, a young officer named Phillips who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Here for the follow-up inspection," Torres said casually. "Warden Kellerman expecting you?" "She called in sick today," Phillips replied, and Torres noticed his hand shaking slightly as he processed the paperwork. "First time in 5 years. Deputy Warden Cross is running things." That changed everything. Torres had researched Cross the night before. Former military intelligence, 2 tours in Afghanistan, transferred to the Bureau of Prisons 8 years ago, the same time the anomalies in cell block H started appearing in the records. This wasn't coincidence. Torres made his way toward the medical wing, trying to look purposeful but not suspicious. The facility was a maze of identical corridors, but he'd memorized the layout. He passed inmates being escorted to their recreation hour, shackled and silent, their eyes distant like they'd forgotten what the outside world looked like. One of them, a man with a scarred face and gray beard, locked eyes with Torres as they passed. His lips moved, forming words without sound. Get out. The medical wing was quieter than the rest of the facility. Torres showed his credentials to the guard at the checkpoint, a heavy-set man who barely glanced at them before waving him through. Inside, the smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask something else, something chemical and wrong. He found the nurse's station empty, files scattered across the desk like someone had left in a hurry. Can I help you? The voice came from behind him. Torres turned to find a small Asian woman in scrubs, her eyes sharp and evaluating. Her name badge read, Artie Chen, RN. Rebecca Chen? Torres kept his voice low. I'm Michael Torres, Federal Investigator. I need to talk to you about Cell Block H. Her expression didn't change, but he saw her pupils dilate slightly. Fear response. I don't know what you're talking about. I work in general medical. Cell Block H has its own medical protocols. I know about Martinez. I know about the records you're keeping. Torres took a risk. I know you're trying to document what's really happening here. For a long moment, Chen stared at him, weighing her options. Then she glanced at the security camera in the corner, currently pointed away from them. Medication room. 2 minutes. She walked away without waiting for a response. Torres counted to 90, then followed. The medication room was small, lined with locked cabinets and a single metal table. Chen was waiting, and in her hands was a flash drive. Everything's on here, she whispered urgently. Real medical records. What they're doing in H Block, it's not about security. It's a psychological experiment. Sensory deprivation, isolation, but pushed beyond anything approved by any ethics board. They're testing how completely they can break a human mind, how to extract information, how to destroy someone's sense of self. Who authorized this? It goes higher than Kellerman, higher than this facility. Someone in Washington wanted a program that could break anyone, terrorist or not. They chose ADX Florence because nobody cares what happens to these inmates. Society already decided they're monsters. Chen's hands were shaking. But Martinez wasn't a terrorist. He was a whistleblower, a former NSA analyst who tried to expose surveillance programs. They sent him here to silence him permanently. Torres took the flash drive, his mind racing. Why are you telling me this? Why risk everything? Chen's eyes filled with tears. Because 3 weeks ago, they brought in a new inmate. Political dissident from overseas, claimed he had information about terror networks. But I recognized him from the news. He was a journalist, investigating government corruption. They're going to do to him what they did to Martinez, and I can't just watch another person be erased. Before Torres could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. An alarm began to wail, and Chen's face went white. Lockdown, she breathed. They know. Torres grabbed her arm. Is there another way out? Service tunnel leads to the outer maintenance building. But it's through H Block. She was already moving, pulling a key card from her pocket. We have maybe 3 minutes before they seal all the passages. They ran through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, the red emergency lights making everything look like a nightmare. Torres could hear boots pounding somewhere behind them, voices shouting orders. They reached the checkpoint to Cell Block H, and Chen swiped her card. Access denied. She tried again. Denied. They've locked me out, she said, panic rising in her voice. Torres pulled out his federal override card, the one that was supposed to work in any federal facility. He swiped it, and the door clicked open. They rushed through, and immediately, the atmosphere changed. The silence here was absolute, broken only by their footsteps and ragged breathing. The cells were dark, but Torres could feel eyes watching them from behind those 4-inch windows. The tunnel entrance is at the end of the block, Chen whispered. They were halfway down the corridor when a voice echoed through the speakers. Mr. Torres. It was Deputy Warden Cross, his tone calm and almost friendly. I'm disappointed. We could have worked together. Instead, you've chosen to believe the delusions of criminals and the paranoia of an overwrought nurse. Torres kept moving, pulling Chen along. They passed cell 17, where Thomas Berkeley's face appeared at the window, his empty eyes suddenly alert. He was mouthing something. Torres couldn't make it out at first, then realized, trap. The tunnel entrance was right ahead, a heavy door marked maintenance access. Chen reached for it, and Torres saw the tripwire a second too late. Don't. Chen's hand hit the door handle, and everything exploded into chaos. Lights blazed to life, blinding them. Steel barriers slammed down, blocking the corridor behind them and ahead. They were trapped in a 20-foot section of cell block H, caged like the inmates they'd tried to save. Cross's voice returned, no longer friendly. "You've just committed federal crimes, Mr. Torres. Breaking into restricted areas, stealing classified medical records, compromising facility security. The inmates here are master manipulators, and I'm afraid you've been manipulated. But don't worry. We have a cell prepared for you. Cell 23, in fact. It's been vacant for a while, and we've been meaning to test some new protocols." Torres's blood turned to ice. Through the barriers, he could see figures approaching, guards in full tactical gear. But then, from the cells around them, a sound began to rise. It started as a whisper, then grew louder. The inmates of cell block H, men who hadn't spoken to another human being in years, were chanting. One word, over and over: witness. 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 Chen clutched Torres's arm. "The flash drive," she breathed. "Did you send it to anyone? Backup? Cloud?" Torres's heart sank as he realized his fatal mistake. In his rush to document everything with his phone, he'd forgotten the most basic rule of investigation. He'd kept all the evidence with him. And now Cross had them both. The tactical team was 20 feet away when Thomas Berkeley's voice cut through the chanting. "Torres." The ventilation shaft, 17th cell, maintenance access. Berkeley was at his window, his face pressed against the slot, more alive than Torres had seen him. "I was CIA. I know the layout. They don't think we remember, but we remember everything." Torres looked up and saw it, a ventilation grate directly above Berkeley's cell. But to reach it, they'd need to get inside the cell itself. With a prisoner convicted of espionage. A man who might be working with Cross, setting another trap. The guards were 15 feet away, raising their weapons. On the ground. Now. Torres had 1 second to make a choice that would determine if the truth about ADX Florence ever saw daylight. Trust a broken spy in a Supermax cell, or surrender to a system that had already decided he was expendable. But when Chen reached for his hand and squeezed it once, firmly, he realized she'd already made her choice. She was willing to risk everything on the slim chance that somewhere inside Thomas Berkeley, the man who once swore an oath to protect his country, still existed. Torres made his decision. Cell 17. Berkeley, open the slot. What happened next would be replayed in congressional hearings for years to come. But in that moment, as the guards closed in and the truth hung in the balance, only one thing mattered. The sound of Thomas Berkeley's cell door clicking unlocked from the inside, the cell door swung open, and Torres didn't hesitate. He pulled Chen inside, slamming the door shut just as the tactical team reached them. Berkeley stood pressed against the far wall, his hands raised, showing he wasn't a threat. In the dim light of the cell, Torres could see the man's entire body trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding himself together after 8 years of systematic psychological destruction. "The grate," Berkeley gasped, pointing upward with a shaking hand. "Maintenance shaft. Leads to the outer ventilation system. I mapped every inch of this place before they broke me. Muscle memory doesn't forget." Outside, Cross's voice boomed through the speakers. "Berkeley, you've just added 20 years to your sentence. Torres, Chen, you have 10 seconds to exit that cell before we use force." Torres looked at the ventilation grate, then at Chen, then at Berkeley. The man who'd been reduced to a weeping statue just yesterday was suddenly moving with purpose, dragging his concrete bed beneath the grate. "I spent 3 years planning an escape I knew I'd never have the courage to attempt," Berkeley said, his voice stronger now. "Turns out I was just waiting for a reason that mattered more than my own freedom." "Why are you helping us?" Chen asked, already climbing onto the bed. Berkeley's hollow eyes met hers. "Because Martinez was my friend. Because they made me watch what they did to him through the air vents. Because every night for 3 years, I've heard his screams in my sleep. And because if you don't get that evidence out, I'll die in here knowing I let them win." The cell door shuddered as the tactical team began forcing it open. Torres boosted Chen up to the grate. She pulled it free, revealing a shaft barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. "It's tight," she called down. "Really tight. Go," Torres urged. Chen pulled herself into the shaft and disappeared into darkness. Torres turned to Berkeley. "Come with us." Berkeley shook his head, a sad smile crossing his ruined face. "I can't fit anymore. Lost too much muscle mass. And besides, someone needs to slow them down." He met Torres's eyes, and for a moment, the investigator saw the CIA operative Berkeley once was, the man who'd sacrificed everything for secrets and lies, now making one final choice that actually meant something. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them our names. Tell them we were still human." The door burst open. Guards flooded in, but Berkeley lunged forward, throwing himself at the first 2 officers. Not to fight, but to tangle them up, to buy 5 precious seconds. Go, he screamed. Torres grabbed the edge of the shaft and pulled himself up. Below, he heard the sickening sound of batons hitting flesh, Berkeley's grunts of pain. Then he was in the shaft, crawling through absolute darkness, following the sound of Chen's movement ahead. The metal was freezing, tight enough that his shoulders scraped the sides with every movement. Behind him, he heard guards trying to follow, their bulky tactical gear making it nearly impossible. There's a junction ahead, Chen called back, her voice echoing strangely. Berkeley said left leads to the outer building, right goes to the incinerator system. They crawled for what felt like hours but was probably 10 minutes. Torres's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he realized with a shock that he had signal. They were close to the outer wall. He pulled it out, the screen's light blinding in the darkness, and did what he should have done hours ago. He uploaded everything, the recordings, the photos of Cell 23, the location data, all of it streaming to 3 different secure servers and to his direct supervisor in Washington. If they didn't make it out, at least the truth would. Ahead, Chen stopped. I see light. There's a grate, but it's secured from the outside. Torres squeezed forward until he was beside her. Through the grate, he could see the maintenance building, empty except for cleaning equipment and spare parts. But the grate was bolted with industrial screws. Can you kick it? Chen braced herself and kicked hard. The grate shuddered but held. She kicked again, and one corner bent. A third kick, and it flew open, clattering to the concrete floor below. Chen dropped through, and Torres followed, landing hard on his shoulder. They were out of the main facility, but they were still inside the outer perimeter, surrounded by 3 layers of fencing, motion sensors, and armed guards. Torres's car was in the visitor lot, a quarter-mile away across open ground. They'd never make it. There, Chen pointed to a maintenance vehicle, an old pickup truck with keys hanging in the ignition. Contractors use it to move between buildings. If we time it right, we can reach the outer gate during shift change. They climbed in, and Torres started the engine. The dash clock read 3:47 p.m. Shift change was at 4 p.m. 13 minutes. They had to hide for 13 minutes, then make a run for freedom. Torres drove the truck behind a storage shed, killing the engine. They sat in silence, listening to sirens wailing inside the main facility, watching guards running towards cell block H. Do you think Berkeley's okay? Chen asked quietly. Torres didn't answer because they both knew the truth. Thomas Berkeley had just assaulted federal officers inside a Supermax prison. He'd be lucky if he ever saw daylight again. But he'd given them a chance, and they couldn't waste it. At 3:59 p.m., Torres started the engine. At 4 p.m. exactly, as the day shift guards moved toward the personnel building and the night shift headed to their posts, Torres drove the maintenance truck toward the outer gate, moving casually, like they belonged there. The guard at the gate looked up, bored, already thinking about dinner. He waved them through without checking credentials. They were outside. They were free. Torres drove for 5 miles in absolute silence before pulling over at a rest stop. Chen was crying, great heaving sobs of relief and trauma. Torres called his supervisor, reporting everything, demanding immediate action. Within an hour, FBI agents were swarming ADX Florence. Within 3 hours, Deputy Warden Cross was in federal custody. Within 6 hours, the story broke nationwide. The investigation that followed uncovered everything Chen had documented and more. Cell Block H had been running an illegal psychological warfare program for 8 years, testing enhanced interrogation techniques that violated every treaty and law the United States had signed. 17 inmates had been subjected to the program. 4 had died. Their deaths had been covered up, their bodies cremated, their records erased. Martinez was one of them. The others included 2 whistleblowers, a journalist, and a political activist, all people who'd threatened to expose government secrets. The operation ran all the way to Washington, to a classified program that had survived multiple administrations because everyone involved knew it existed but nobody wanted to be the one to shut it down. When the inmates finally testified, their stories were horrifying. Men kept in sensory deprivation for months. Psychological torture designed to erase identity. Experiments in breaking human consciousness itself. Thomas Berkeley testified too, from his cell, his voice steady despite the bruises covering his face from the beating after Torres escaped. He described everything he'd witnessed, everything they'd done to Martinez, everything they'd done to him. His testimony lasted 4 hours and resulted in 17 federal convictions. In exchange, his sentence was reduced, and he was transferred to a standard federal prison. Not freedom, but a window. Contact with other humans. A chance to remember his own name. 6 months later, Torres stood outside a congressional hearing room where new legislation was being debated, laws that would fundamentally change how Supermax prisons operated. Rebecca Chen stood beside him, no longer a nurse but a witness, an advocate, someone who'd risked everything and somehow survived. They'd both been through therapy, both still had nightmares about red emergency lights and the sound of boots in corridors. "Do you think it'll actually change anything?" Chen asked. Torres watched senators file into the room, cameras flashing, media hungry for the next chapter of the story. "I think we proved that even in the darkest place in America, even when the system is designed to make people disappear, the truth can still get out. That has to count for something." But as they walked away, Torres's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, just like the call that had started everything. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. It was a photo, taken inside ADX Florence. Cell Block H. But it wasn't the old H block. This was new, renovated, redesigned. And on the wall, barely visible in the shadows, was a small plaque, H Block 2, Advanced Research Wing. The text below the photo read, "Did you really think you stopped anything? You just taught us to hide it better. Cell 47 is waiting. We know where you live, Mr. Torres. We know where Chen lives. We know about your families. Stay quiet, and maybe we'll forget about you. Keep talking, and you'll learn firsthand what we've improved." The experiments never stopped. They just moved. And this time, there won't be any witnesses. Torres stared at the message, his hands shaking. Chen saw his face and knew immediately something was wrong. "What is it?" He showed her the phone. Her face went pale. They stood there in the hallway outside Congress, surrounded by people congratulating themselves on reform, on justice, on change. And they both understood the terrible truth. They'd won a battle. But the war was far from over. In the Colorado mountains, behind 7-foot concrete walls and 4-inch windows, in cells that no camera would ever see, the work continued. Different faces, different names, same nightmare. Because the people who'd created Cell Block H weren't in prison. Most of them had never even been charged. They'd simply moved the operation, buried it deeper, learned from their mistakes. And somewhere in a classified file, Torres knew, there were 2 new names on a list. His and Chen's. Not for arrest. Not yet. But as potential test subjects, people who knew too much, people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted to stay quiet. Torres deleted the message and took Chen's hand. "We keep fighting," he said quietly. "We keep talking. We keep exposing it every time we find it. Because the moment we let fear silence us, they've already won." Chen nodded, but her eyes were haunted. They both knew what they'd signed up for now. They'd looked into the heart of American darkness and survived. But darkness doesn't forget. And it always comes back. 3 weeks later, a corrections officer at a federal prison in Texas found something disturbing during his rounds. An inmate, a minor drug offender with no history of violence, was sitting in his cell in perfect silence, staring at the wall, tears streaming down his face. When the officer asked what was wrong, the inmate didn't respond. He just kept staring, crying, exactly like Thomas Berkeley had been when Torres first found him. The officer checked the inmate's file. He'd been transferred 3 days earlier from an unknown location. No paperwork. No explanation. Just a note in the system, subject released from observation. Cleared for general population. The officer tried to report it, but his supervisor shut him down immediately. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered," he was told. "Some things are above your pay grade." That night, the officer went home and couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the inmate's empty eyes, the tears that wouldn't stop, the absolute silence. He kept thinking about the stories he'd heard, whispers among corrections staff about a place where inmates went and came back broken, or didn't come back at all. He thought about making a call, finding someone to tell, an investigator maybe, someone who'd listen. But then he thought about his family, his mortgage, his life. And like so many others before him, he decided some truths were too dangerous to speak out loud. In the mountains of Colorado, in a facility that officially doesn't exist, in Cell Block H2, the lights never turn off, and the experiments never end. And every day, someone new learns that in America, there are places where justice doesn't reach, where laws don't apply, where people can disappear into silence and never be heard from again. The prison where inmates beg to leave isn't just ADX Florence. It's anywhere the powerful decide that some people don't deserve to be remembered as human anymore. And until we're willing to look into that darkness without blinking, to demand answers even when the cost is everything, those places will always exist. The only question is, who's next?